Welcome back, everyone. We are going to have some fun today looking at false teaching. No, not specific false teaching from certain people, but word pictures about false teaching. Kudos to Grant, who sent me a text the other day and said, what are some visual representations that you might think of for false teaching coming into a church? And so I thought about it for a little bit, and then we actually did our Bible study, our midweek Bible study on this the other day. And so I thought I would just share it with you because it's interesting to understand how important it is that we do not fall into the error of any kind of false teaching. The purpose of my YouTube channel here is to know what we believe, why we believe it, and how it affects our lives. And so it's so important that we understand things that we believe, and to make sure we're understanding and believing the right things, we need to make sure we're not going to be believing things that are wrong. And so we're going to look at 3 word pictures today. The first one is going to come straight out of the Bible, straight out of the book of Galatians, which I happen to be teaching through right now in our Sunday morning services. And so I just talked about this one a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to show it to you. Galatians chapter 5, verse 7. Paul is, of course, writing to people who are falling back into Judaism. They're falling back into the law. He says some people have come in and they've encouraged you to do the wrong thing. And so he says this, you ran well, past tense. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who called you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Leaven, of course, is yeast. And so that's our first word picture. False teaching is like yeast. Just takes a little bit to make a lot grow. I'll show you a picture here of crackers versus bread. Okay, what's the difference between crackers and bread? Well, the difference, of course, is yeast. You put some yeast in there. And what happens when you put yeast in, it doesn't take very much. When you put yeast in, and when you're making bread, it ferments and it produces carbon dioxide and alcohol. The alcohol eventually burns off within the whole baking process, but the carbon dioxide causes these little pockets of air, which makes the whole loaf of bread to rise. And it doesn't take very much for it to permeate the whole loaf of bread. It's not like part of it raises and some of it doesn't, but it permeates the whole thing, and it causes the whole thing to be affected. I had to look this up because I'm not a baker myself, really. And I found out that it takes about 2¼ teaspoons to raise 4 cups of flour. So it doesn't take a lot of yeast to raise a whole loaf of bread. And what a great picture that is of false teaching that comes into the church, because it doesn't take a lot. It could just take one person in a church coming in with some new idea, some wrong idea, and often they're very charismatic as far as people just being drawn to them, and people just want to believe the things that they tell them. And so pretty soon it spreads and spreads. You might even have a church split, or you might have people hating each other, and you have all these fights over something that is wrong. And that was exactly what was happening there in the region of Galatia. So my question is, why would people do this? Why would people be so susceptible to following wrong teachers and wrong teaching? And I'm just going to throw out 2 reasons that I think might help us with understanding this. And one is that people love to hear something new. Whenever something new and fresh and exciting comes down the line, people just want to jump on it. You know, it's the latest fad, it's the latest whatever, latest church growth scheme, the latest interesting thing. I think we see so much of this in our society, like with the whole critical race theory bandwagon and the whole homosexual thing and all that. It's just like people, this is new. We want to jump on this. And it's just so sad that it's permeating our churches. A little bit of leaven leavens the whole lump. A little bit of yeast leavens the whole thing, because people just say, I want something new. Give me something new. Give me something excited. I'm so tired with my humdrum life. But the second reason I think that people fall prey to this leaven or this yeast is because people hear what they want to hear. People hear what they want to hear. What makes me feel good? What makes me feel good is what I want to hear. And so and someone comes along and they teach something. Well, the Galatians, for goodness sakes, the example there is the Judaizers were coming in and saying, you know, faith is great, but you need to do something to get to God. And when you tell someone you can do something to get to God, that sounds really good because it elevates me. It makes me think, wow, I'm good enough. I can actually do something to get to God. So that was sounding really good to them. I want to actually take you to a place where Jesus used this example. It's over in Matthew 16, and we're going to start in verse 6. Matthew 16 and verse 6. He's talking to his disciples about the scribes and the Pharisees. He says, Then Jesus said to them, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Well, then it goes on to explain how they thought, what's he talking about bread? Is because we don't have any bread? What's going on here? Down in verse 11, he says, how is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? The Pharisees and Sadducees were teaching wrong doctrine, and Jesus said, watch out for them, because they are teaching you to obey the law to get to God. And again, that makes us feel good because, wow, there's something I can actually do to get to God. And so people buy into this because it makes them feel good. One more place I want to take you to, and that is in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1. Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and he says, it is actually reported there is sexual immorality among you, and such sexual immorality as is not even named among the Gentiles, that a man has his father's wife. And you are puffed up and have not rather mourned that he who has done this deed might be taken away from you. For I indeed, as absent in body but present in spirit, have already judged as though I were present him who has so done this deed. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, when you're gathered together, along with my spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. Moving down, your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? You know what he's saying here? He's saying you are allowing sexual sins in your church. And even though you might not be actually standing up there and saying it's okay to do this, you are allowing this to go on and you're actually glorifying this. And that action itself teaches people something wrong. And that thing that they're teaching that is wrong is that sexual immorality is okay. In this situation, it was a man apparently having an affair with his stepmom. But in our society today, it's teen pregnancy. It's homosexuality, it's things like that. And people are like, oh, well, that's okay. You know, congratulations. That's a wonderful thing. And we need to step up and say, no, this is not a good thing. This is wrong. It's terrible. And when we don't stand up, we are spreading the leaven. We're spreading the yeast that this is okay. That's why we need to stand up and speak about things like that are wrong and tell people where it's wrong. So that's the first word picture that we have of false teaching that can come into our assembly, that can come into our church. But here's the second one. This one's a little more gory, if I can say it that way. And that is false teaching is like rotting flesh, like rotting flesh. I want to take you to 2 Timothy now. In some Bible versions, this is going to be very clear. In some, it's a little more hidden. But it's 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 14. Let me get this to you. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 14. Paul is writing to Timothy, and he says, remind them of these things, charging them before the Lord not to strive about words to no profit, but to the ruin of the hearers. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. But shun profane and idle babblings, for they will increase to more ungodliness, and their message will spread like a cancer. Now, I believe in the King James it says canker, and some of the other Bible versions, it will use the word gangrene, I understand. And that's because the actual Greek word is the word from which we get our English word gangrene. Gangrene is a very nasty disease, and it attacks places of your body where maybe you've had an incision and there's a bacterial infection or just lack of blood supply. So often it happens in the extremities. And there's different versions of gangrene. Some you can go on for a while, but some of them gas gangrene, where it causes a gas in the skin. Actually, they say you can die within 48 hours. So sometimes it's a slow, painful death. Sometimes it's a very fast death. And I actually am going to show you a picture. This is not a real picture. This is more of a drawing. The real pictures are kind of nasty, but hey, you can look them up online if you want to yourself. Just kind of a drawing from the Mayo Clinic about what it looks like. You see the extremities, they start to turn black and they start to die because there's no blood flow and there's a bacterial infection. And I think one interesting thing about this is it often does affect the extremities of the body, you know, those weaker parts where they're not getting much blood supply. And I think what a great picture of false teaching, because false teaching doesn't necessarily go for the ones who are strong. It goes for the weaker ones on the fringes, where they might even think that they're strong, but they're not strong. And they can be attacked by false teachers and they just fall prey to this. Well, how do you keep from falling prey to false teaching, from this gangrene, from this infection? Well, the antidote is knowing the truth. You've got to know the truth. How do you know false teaching? You know false teaching because you know the truth. In fact, right back here, let me get the Bible back up. In verse 15, This verse, if you grew up in Awana, you know this verse, be diligent to present yourself approved to God. A worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Rightly dividing the word of truth, that means to handle it correctly. You need to know the truth. You might be one of those little extremity Christians, and you're out there, and you're not really strong in the faith, and you're not closely connected to the blood supply, which is the truth of the Bible. And you are going to be so much more susceptible to falling prey to these kind of things than somebody who's strong, mature. So the goal is to keep maturing, to keep growing. Don't be a gangrene Christian. Okay, don't be a gangrene Christian. Now for the third word picture. The third word picture is destructive influences from the inside. I'm going to give you an illustration to explain what I mean. Destructive external influences from the outside. So if you've ever been to Moscow, Russia, in the Kremlin there, you may have toured around and seen what they call the Sarbell, T-S-A-R, the Sarbell or the Sarbell. The word Tsar in Russia means king, so it's something that's great, it's something that's really big. So in the Kremlin, there is a huge bell. It's the biggest bell in the world, to my understanding, but it's never been rung. And it's actually the third. I'm going to show you a picture of it here. This is 1997. That's me standing in front of it, that good-looking dude with those cool sunglasses. Yeah, that's me in 1997 as I was over there and I toured, and I was able to see this Sarbell. Now, the Sarbell is actually the third generation of the bell. The first one was completed in 1600, and it weighed 40,000 pounds. Took 24 men to ring the clapper, but it was hung in a wooden building, and it caught fire, and it fell, smashed to the ground. And so they made a second bell. It was cast in 1655, and this one weighed 220,000 pounds. But again, they had fire in the building and it crashed to the ground. And so they took the pieces and they made it bigger, and they added some gold and some silver to it to try to make the mixture better. And they built another one, the third generation of the Sarbell, and is over 20. This was finished in 1737. So this has been around a while. Over 20 feet high, and it weighed over 200 tons. This thing is heavy. They used pieces of the other bells, melted it all down, and add some things to it. Well, as they were building this thing, what they would do is they dug a big hole in the ground and they cast it in the ground. And they had the mold in the ground, and they would lift it up with structure support, and they would put the ornaments on it and stuff like that. Well, as they were doing this, there was a fire once again in this building. And to put the fire out before the whole thing collapsed, they sprayed water on it. And of course, water getting on the hot bell before it was actually cooled all the way, it destroyed the chemical makeup of it, if you will. And it caused these big cracks. And then, of course, the fire burned through the supports, and the whole thing fell back down into the hole where it was being cast. And this huge piece fell off right there. A huge piece that weighed 23,000 pounds fell off. And that sat in that hole. They couldn't figure out how to get this bell out of the hole for 100 years. It sat in there for 100 years. So finally, in 1836, they were able to pull it out, and they set it up there on that stand. So as I think about that, I think what a great picture of false doctrine coming into the church, because this time it wasn't so much something from within, but there were destructive tendencies from outside, this cold water. And it came in the bell wasn't yet ready to handle this. The bell wasn't strong enough. It wasn't solidified enough to be able to handle cold water. Now you can put cold water on it. I mean, it sits out there in Moscow winters, and they get snow. It's cold up there. And it can deal with it just fine. It's not cracking, but it wasn't set yet. It wasn't ready yet to handle these forces from outside. And so as I think about how we deal with false teaching, we need to be careful for the people, and maybe it's us, but we need to be careful for the people around us who aren't yet stable in their faith. They're still kind of cooling, so to speak. They're still kind of becoming stronger. I think about the young people in our churches, our kids, and even newly saved people or folks who have never really matured. They need to grow. They need to learn. They need to find answers for the questions. That's something people should do. If you have questions, and all of us do have questions, don't look at your questions and just say, well, because I don't understand something. I mean, I don't understand how Jesus could rise from the dead. I don't understand how God could create this world. How can I don't get it? I have questions, so therefore I shouldn't believe it. No, what you do is you take those questions and you search for answers, and that is what builds your faith. If you have questions, that's a good thing because it's an opportunity for you to have answers. If you just say, I don't understand how God could create the world. Oh, they tell me that evolution happened, and they really smart people say that, so therefore, hey, that must be what it is. That's not very smart. Logic is, let me actually look at this and see. And then you say, okay, as I study apologetics and I study things, that Christians believe, you begin to understand, oh, there are answers for these things. You just have to look in the right places for them. So do you want to be strong where you can handle these destructive outside influences? You've got to study, you've got to learn. And part of that is watching my channel and so many other things. So many great people that have YouTube channels, and hopefully your church stands for the truth. And if your church doesn't teach and stand for the truth, you just need to leave there and find a different one. And I don't mean that they just open the Bible and they talk about whatever they want to, but they actually study. You might not agree with everything they say, but they need to be studying it and trying to learn and trying to teach their people in the right way. So you could probably come up with many other word pictures about false teachers come in, but we just need to be so careful. Watch out for those false teachers. Know what you believe, why you believe it, and how it affects your life. Contact me if you want to. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know if you're getting anything from my videos. And I hopefully will see you next time. God bless.